I hope you were inspired by Pam's lesson. For those that were asking, her book is on Amazon. So that's Sparkle by Dr. Pam George. It is on Amazon. Up next, we have Thabani Mashava. He's joining us from Zimbabwe. The title for his lesson is The Church is Powerful. Thabani has been a church leader for 13 years, and in September of last year, he was appointed teacher in our family of churches. I heard Thabani deliver this lesson for the first time when he was in Botswana, visiting the church there. And today I'm hoping to get this lesson to a wider audience. In an age of trillion-dollar budgets and seemingly invincible billion-dollar billionaires, perhaps we need a reminder that the church is indeed powerful. In preparation for the conference, Thabani and I had a Zoom call, and I can truly say that not only will you hear a great lesson today, but you will also hear from a great man of God. I give you Thabani Mashava from Zimbabwe.
Welcome. Hello, Otoma, and hello, everyone. And it's so good to be here and such a privilege to be here. And I would like to believe that most of you are American. And so please excuse my accent. My accent might be a little off for some of you. So I know my good friend Doug was advising me to speak slowly. So I hope that you can get my accent. So like Otoma said, I'm here in the Southern Africa. That's where Zimbabwe is. We're just north, and we share a border just north of South Africa, and also Botswana, Zambia, and Mozambique. So we kind of landlocked right in there. And so it's happy days, and I'm excited to share. I'm going to share a lot from my perspective as an African man. So I hope that somewhere, somehow, the things that I will share will also resonate with you, out there, wherever you are, but mostly I think in the Americas. And you find that we are more American than you think. We know a lot about America. Most of our kids know more cities in America than they do of the cities in Zimbabwe, strangely so. And a lot of our language has been influenced by the Americans, and a lot of what happens in America affects us. And for your own information, Zimbabwe does not have, well, we kind of have some kind of pseudo currency of our own, but we predominantly are a US dollar economy. So whatever happens with your monetary policy and politics and so on does tend to affect us here. So we are, most salaries and shops, everything is tagged in US dollars and all that. So we're very much interested in also what happens out there in the US. But anyway, let's jump right into it. My topic is the church is powerful. And so I want to delve into Matthew 16, and I believe it's a passage that most of us are familiar with. And some of you might be even familiar with the perspective that I'm going to bring this afternoon, and I believe it's morning out there in the US. It's about 5:24 here in Zimbabwe. So the church is powerful. What do we mean by that? Because I also don't want to send the wrong signal about the church being powerful and in a sense that will bring out a distortion again to the whole thing. But when we talk about power, what do we mean when we say the church is powerful? And I know that power is described in so many different ways, and our ideas are so different, and we are not so different from our brothers and sisters in the first century who the whole time that Jesus was with them, they expected him to bring some powerful redemption, some powerful emancipation from Roman yoke or colonization, something that we are very familiar with here in these parts of the world. Zimbabwe is a pretty young country compared to the US. We are 45 years old this April as a country, having taken over, taken the country back in the after a war that led to our independence from the British. We used to be called Rhodesia before that, which is a very interesting story, really, because the reason that we went to war as the black Africans was so that we could take back our country, have independence, political, economic independence, and all that, and because we had a very segregatory system, and where it was clearly demarcated, whites on one side, blacks on one side. Black people were not allowed to walk in certain places and so on. And then the land issue was also an issue, and so many things that everyone was hoping would be addressed with the onset of independence. And so strangely, when we look now, is we've done some kind of a roundabout and found ourselves back where we were, before that. And so it raises a lot of questions, a lot of disorientation, and so on. So anyway, I'm going ahead of myself here. In Matthew 16, we get a scene or a scenario of Jesus taking his disciples to this place called Caesarea Philippi. Now, let me just do a little bit of background here. So this is the backstory to that, and then we will get into the passage shortly. So there is Caesarea Philippi. These are the names that it has been known as. Baal-Gad, this was during the days of Joshua and Moses. Baal-Hamon, because it is actually, it houses the tallest or the highest peak in Israel, which is Mount Hermon. It also was called Panias when the Greeks took over. And this was dedicated to this fella here, the half man, half god, the Greek god Pan, who is supposed to be the god of fertility. So he made sure that if your wife needs to have babies, and he brought that fertility, he blessed and so on. And then this later during the Roman time, and with a bit of Aramaic in there, the pronunciation of Panias was Banias. This is Caesarea Philippi. Now there's a couple of cool things about that area. Mount Hermon is also that area in the Old Testament is the region of Bashan. Now Bashan is famous in Deuteronomy chapter 2, is famous for the area where some of the last giant clans, the Rephaim, were. That is the people that Joshua came and conquered, the giant clans. Bashan also was very infamous for a lot of idol worship. That's where Baal worship began, or was really central there. And that's the region again. In the splitting of the kingdom of Israel, Jeroboam set up a rival temple area or worship center for fear that the Israelites, the 10 tribes, would continue to go to Israel, to worship, and so they would then go back, and he didn't want to lose the power and the kingdom that he was now running. So he built an altar there. He built a rival place of worship, and there was a golden a calf that he put up there, and the northern kingdom of Israel were worshiping there. So it's an interesting story around there. And then famously also, according to Jewish tradition, Mount Hermon is the place that you will read about even in some of the extra biblical material like First Enoch, that talks about that place was the mountain peak where the rebel sons of God that we read about in Genesis 6, where they descended to conjured a plan, a strategy, which culminated in them having relations, sexual relations, or taking the daughters of men. And that led again to the Nephilim and all the story that brings us again to the what I alluded to earlier on of the giant clans. So there was a lot of other god worship in that area. It was like the center of pagan worship. Let me show you a few more pictures there. Right. Okay. So this is what it looks like now. Okay, it will make sense as I explain. So for now, let me just read the passage in Matthew 16, from verse 13. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, some John the Baptist, others Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, "But who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ." In other words, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, or Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." We stop there. Now, this is a very unusual thing that is happening here. Jesus has taken his disciples, who are Jewish young men, to a red district. I don't know what what that looks like in your place, but this is a place that you just don't go. It's a bad place. It's somewhere your mother would not be happy to hear you visited. This is a terrible place. I mentioned the god Pan, the half man, half goat fella. There he is, who is supposed to be the god of fertility. Now, let me just show you something icky here. All right, there we go. So when Jesus was speaking, he had taken his disciples to this area, Caesarea Philippi, and this is what they could see at that time. All right, and now I want you to see here, there is this cave, the first one. That's the cave that was a temple built by Herod in dedication to Emperor Augustus. Now, this has a lot to do with emperor worship or Caesar worship, which is a very big theme. If we are to understand also the context of the New Testament, it would be good to have a grip on Caesar worship, what that really meant. And so you have the Temple of Augustus, and then you also have the Grotto of Pan. This is a cave home dedication to the god Pan. And then you have the Temple of Zeus. This is when the Greeks now, this left by the Greeks, the chief god Zeus. And then you had the upper temple of the dancing goats, lower temple of the dancing goats. Let me explain that. So what would happen here is that this was like a very national, international place that, was really rife with, quote unquote, spiritual activity and other god worship. And this is where people came to appease the gods, to seek their favor. And so what would happen is Pan, in dedication to him, because of his goat-like features, and the men, there would be festivals held here in the courts of the dancing goats, or the upper tomb and lower tomb or temple, where men would actually have sexual intimacy with female goats, and vice versa, the goats, male and female goats. So it was all like a sick orgy kind of, twisted thing going on there, and they had these annual festivities where they would put like a giant, a giant carving of a male organ. It would be put on a cart and driven through the city. There was a lower city they built, and the women would dance around that with all kinds of obscenity. And this was all to appease this god Pan, so that he could bless them. And so this was a very pivotal area to maintaining the balance with the gods and keeping the gods happy and keeping, the everything going on. Caesar or emperor worship was very critical in that the emperors were treated as divinity, and they were deified when they died. And the living emperor, his job was to sustain order, to sustain prosperity by him pleasing the gods. And when they died and they were deified, they would be at the side up there in the heavens, quote unquote, next to their patron god, and to bless the peoples and ensure the security of the empire and its prosperity. Now let me just rewind a little bit there. So this is the cave just at the base of Mount Hermon. You can see that big rock there, it's Mount Hermon. And now this cave was known in the ancient world as the gates of Hades, or the entrance to the underworld. Now, before 1000 AD, during Jesus' time, there was a very powerful spring of water that would come from underground, flowing all the way down to part of the tributary to the Jordan River, and then it fed all downstream. And so it was a very fascinating, something to see there, the power of the water coming out. And they just didn't understand what was going on and where it was coming from, but they believed that that was the entrance to the underworld, which is Hades. And in the ancient world, Hades signified the land of the dead. This was the holding place where the unrighteous would be. And then you see there is a little window there. Those are niches built to different other deities or gods. Okay, so these are the gates of, this is what they call the gate or the entrance to the underworld, which is Hades. And in their time, Baal was also known as the Lord of the Dead. And that's how he ends up with the title of, or Satan being identified as Baal, because of him being associated with death and the underworld and so on. Okay, so there used to be water flowing from this cave and so on, and you can see there another angle of that. And so there's the cave. So now after in 1000 AD, I believe there was quite a terrible earthquake which shifted the plates. And so now the water comes sort of from the side of the cave, just next to the cave, but it used to come out from the cave and would go and water the rest of the land. And you can see the area is really, those are the ruins there. And again, we come back to what it looked like at that time of Jesus. Okay, so that is the background. These are the niches again, built for smaller gods. That's below Mount Hermon. And this whole area, mind you, again, is very rife with all this activity. And yes, there we go. And now, when we come back now, Jesus brings these disciples, these Jewish men, to this place that is so pagan, so messed up with all these absurd obscenities. And it was a place that symbolized the system, the power, the worship conviction, and what their world considered to be important, what drove the world, what drove their world, And Jesus brings them there, and he decides to ask the question, who is the Son of Man? And then when Peter answers something that is given insight, spiritual insight by God, to say, you are the Messiah, you are the Son of God. And it's so, and then Jesus says, you're right. You're Peter. Now, Peter in the Greek is Petros, which is a stone, or and then rock. And then he says, and on this rock, I'll build my church. And the rock is Petra. Petra is a large mass of rock, which we see here. So I believe that, even looking at what the opinion of many scholars, and to say Jesus contextually, because, we have to rewind and take a time travel and go back to say, hey, what did this mean to those people? the gates of Hades, and the mountain, or the rock rather, and you find this is what Jesus is saying. This rock represents the so-called system and stability of the peoples there. It was their sense of security. It was where they came to worship their gods, where they came to get answers and clarity and some form of comfort to say, we've done this. Did I mention that, they would throw their children down the cave? Because it was believed that, the gods would hibernate, would go back there under to the underworld in winter, only to emerge in spring. And so the people would throw their children into that water in the cave, and they would die there. And the idea was, we are appeasing these gods so they can bless us. And so this is where now we see Jesus brings these guys and he makes this declaration. But the declaration is so intense because he then says, and on this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Now, this is powerful. This is fascinating because he brings them right there to sort of the HQ of pagan worship and what drove the pagan belief, and what they believed drove their systems, their economies, their livelihood, and everything. And again, coupled with emperor worship, which was also represented there by the temple of Augustus, it represented, the order of things, to say this is what we got to protect. This is where we need to come for our security. And it represented all of that. But Jesus talks about his church, and he says, my church, I will build on this rock. And I believe that this rock, this mountain, this place that represented all these values, it represented all this culture and their power. Jesus says, guess what? My church is going to be sitting right on top of that. And he says the gates of Hades. In other words, he's talking about death, the underworld, which is the land of the dead. Says, well, I'm going to trump all that the church cannot be resisted, because gates are for defensive. So if you think about that for a second, that gates are for defensive purposes. So what Jesus is saying is that his church cannot be withstood by these gates. The church is meant to be on the offensive. It's not supposed to be for the Jews. They tended to want to keep to themselves. They tended to want to just chill and not mind their own business and just survive. But you see, Jesus brings this twist to say, the church is meant to be bringing change. And for me, this really, really just inspires me in a very big way. Because if you check out in Matthew 12, verse 28, Jesus is accused of being a demon-possessed guy because he was, casting demons. And he says, well, if I'm casting demons by the power of God, then it means that by the finger of God, then it means the kingdom has come. So the Messiah would be identified by that power that, this is what would happen. And I find that very powerful, that Jesus, he brought the power to say, I will overcome all these systems, through the church, through my people. We will overcome and override the systems and what brings security, to us, to the world. And it's so, when you think about it, what Jesus was really saying here, my brothers and sisters, it's really, really just mind-blowing. I look at how, again, we might mistake and say, okay, so the church should be on the offense. What does that mean? Do we need to go and demonstrate? Do we need to go and raise Cain? Do we need to go and fight? Do we need to take up arms? Do we need to do all this? But clearly, when we look at Jesus and when he teaches, he had been teaching the Sermon on the Mount. Think about it when he says, You have heard it was said, love your neighbor, or hate your enemy. But he says, I say, pray for your enemy, turn the other cheek. If someone forces you to walk a mile, give them another mile extra. Love and compassion and caring and all that. And that's what he was preaching. And people expected otherwise. They expected, man, this guy is going to get us to take up arms and take our country back. But that's not what Jesus was saying. When you look at Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, he talks about just Jesus in chapter 1, how he has been raised far beyond all rule and authority. He's above that. Everything is under his feet. Then he says he's been given his head in his church, which is his body. And he goes on to say, man, the church is the manifold wisdom of God. Because there's this whole plan of Gentiles and all these people to come together and be part of one body. And he says that this is the power, this is the wisdom of God, that, he will infect the world. He will affect it through our image bearing living. And still in Ephesians in chapter 6, after he speaks on that, and then he speaks of relationships, how to conduct ourselves in the how they were to conduct themselves in the church, with outsiders, and relationships, marriage relationships, parent relationships, boss and worker, slave and master relationships. And then he says, don't forget something. All these things that we'll face, we mustn't forget that we are not each other's enemies as humanity, but there is a spiritual world that is there. And he says our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, and all that in the realms. And he says, be mindful of that there's more going on here. And now when you think about that, and then Jesus says, but how do you engage the battle? And he talks about putting on the full armor of God, the gospel, faith, all those things, prayer, the readiness and all that. And it's so fascinating. Now, I remember one time, my wife and I, we love doing outreaches. We share our story, our lives with people that care to listen. We go on radio. We had challenges in our marriage. We had a few years ago, we almost got a divorce. There were some things that happened in there. And so after that, the way we went through the challenges was simply just by, going into scripture and being with other Christians that we had a close relationship with. And, we'll talk about how we're doing, how we're feeling, and we're able to, by the grace of God, overcome. And I remember one of the resolutions we made is like, hey, we've got to find ways of reaching out to other couples, other people. And I remember we did a seminar in one small town that we were living in before December. And we did a seminar there. And one of the guys that came, there was a couple that came that was also working on it. They had lodged a divorce already, all the papers, the lawyers, everything. And they heard our story. And then there was one guy, another couple. This guy is the president of one of our political parties, the opposition political parties here in Zimbabwe, and he attended. And so he's part of a committee that the president set up, which is made up of different political party presidents that participated in elections. So he keeps them in a committee to say he wants to get their thoughts and so on as he runs his government. And so this guy was sitting in there and listening to us talking and how we had embarked on a journey of searching ourselves, digging deep into ourselves, who we are, what is image bearing, who we are supposed to be in Christ, and the distortions that we struggle with that caused us to be where we're at in our marriage. And how we dealt with it, how I dealt with myself and searched myself and dealt with my own brokenness and distortions and things that I had been formed with from childhood and through my early years of adult life that I brought into the marriage. And this guy heard that, and after that he gave me feedback. He says, you know what? I think I would like to invite you to come and talk. I'm going to talk to the president that maybe you need to come and talk to the cabinet ministers, because I think that these guys have a lot of, we all have distortions and traumas that we haven't dealt with, and that explains the level of relational incompetence, and distortions and corruption and all this kind of. And he says, I tell you, if they were to hear these things you are sharing from scripture, because I've never heard this before, people will cry. And I was like, whoa, this is incredible. And by the way, the couple that I was saying was working on a divorce. Long story short, fast forward, when we moved out of the town that we were in, they are leading the church there now. And they became Christians. We didn't do anything special with them. We just shared our lives, our story with them. And so what I am saying here is that the way that we'll wage this war is when we understand that this is about Jesus and the power that he brings to his church. He allows us to share in that. The power of Jesus to overcome the systems that are set up so staunchly and stubbornly. The systems that unfortunately we have been born into and we've bought into. Here in Zimbabwe, in 2017, we had a coup, which is not a coup, because it was so cleverly done. And I remember for the first time, people were what then happened is that the president that was taken out, his own people that took him out, and the opposition people and different other groups, our interests and desires coincided. There was an intersection. So people felt like, when these guys have come to, they're our Messiah. Because look, we have the same vision. We want this man out. Because he had been president for like 40 years or so. And so everyone was happy. The army went onto the streets. And everything was masked because they allowed people to march with the army. People were happy. We're taking selfies with the army. They were like, man, you've liberated us. And one of the deputy president had run away because they wanted to arrest him before that. So he came back and he was going to be the Messiah. And he gave press releases and he would say things like, the voice of the people is the voice of God. And people were like, yes, this is what we needed. This guy is going to bring prosperity to us. Our problems are over. People were allowed to march. I remember I was part of that. I was excited, man. And I remember one brother saying, guys, you want to be careful. We've experienced this heartbreak before. Fast forward 2017, so like 7-8 years later now, the country is no better. The corruption is unprecedented. We are having an unemployment rate of 90%. We don't have our own currency. People are struggling. We had independence. The idea was we'd have people's dignity restored, Black people to live in proper homes, because people were living in a one-roomed home with a family of 5. They just put a curtain to divide things. That's what it was like during the colonial British rule. But I'll tell you that we have continued to build those kind of homes for our people right now. The economy is terrible. People are living in such squalid conditions. The gap between the rich and the poor has increased. You have people that can buy a Rolls Royce, and then you have people that can't even afford to have a meal. So it's so intense. And so what I've seen with all this is that it doesn't matter who comes into power or not, or what color they are. The system of the world is just the same. It's just the same. It just looks different color, different time, but it's the same. We've done a roundabout and gone back to exactly the kind of oppression that was fought for, quote unquote, and people are brokenhearted. People's dreams are gone. In the course of the past 20 years, everyone has lost their pensions. We've got 70-year-old people looking for jobs. We've got 70-year-old people looking for jobs as security guards, whether white or black, because the inflation went to like billions of percentages. I know a lot of my American friends that visit us. Sometimes I give them a present of our $1 trillion note. I wish I had one just now and show you where the $1 trillion note. We had when we then decided to can our currency so we could just adopt the US currency, we had gotten to an amount called a hextillion. Hextillion. We had a quadrillion, and then we are now in hextillion. The zeros were just phenomenal. But you see, all that happened under the new regime of Black Africans. We have multiple landowners or farm owners. That's what we fought for. We're like, all these white people, they own huge pieces of land and our people don't have, or they were kicked off the land. And then when we had the land reform program in 2000, where the whites were kicked off the land, and it was like, yeah, we are redistributing the land. And people were saying, yes, we're taking our people back to Canaan, from Egypt. And guess what? We have people now, politicians who have 10, 15 farms. Some of the issues come out in public because some of them have divorce cases, and then the High Court requires that things are published publicly, the properties that they're fighting for, and you find that you're like, what? How different is this? Than what we had before. How does one man have 15 farms, 5 farms, and yet you have some people squeezing on a small acre of land with no water systems and nothing like that? We still have communities where children walk for 20, 30 kilometers to school. And some of them, because of the distance, they actually live at school. They leave home on Sunday evening, go to school, and come back home on Friday because they can't go back and forth. And in most cases, they're still learning. We call it hot sitting. They learn under the trees. And it's terrible. But what am I saying? Is that when we depend on systems, of all human systems are the same. And it's all the same. It just looks different, but nobody has, because it's not Jesus. It's not what Jesus brings. Jesus' weapons are different. Jesus brings in a different twist to it. He talks of peace. He talks of love. He talks of, just putting the interests of others. He talks of how we got to care for each other. And I think for me also, something I'll mention in closing out is how challenging it is when I see Christians arguing about politics and being so emotional. It happens here. That people get so worked out and they're like, man, this guy, he was cheated on, in the elections were rigged. And this guy I know one of our opposition guys, the chief opposition guy, he actually, is some kind of a pastor, and he says, man, I'm taking the people to Canaan, but he and his MPs have been in government as MPs and running the local governments for the past 20 years, and the corruption has been unprecedented. Land grabbing and in the urban areas and all that. And I'm like, so what is this? I thought these guys were supposed to be our messiahs, our redeemers of some sort. And so at the end of the day, it causes a lot of rifts. We've seen that in the church. People will not talk about this because it gets emotional, it gets heated up, and all the feeling of it's my right, it's all this. But you see, when you look at what Jesus is saying, he's saying that the church should be on the offensive against the principles of darkness, the world systems that are so deceptive, the political systems, the cultural systems, that it doesn't matter how you look at them or how sophisticated they are just not wired to bring us to image bearing and to bring us into a community of love, but it encourages self-actualization, individualism, and all that. And I've seen that has destroyed even our own African essence itself. African people were very communal people, community-based, very peace-loving. We shared everything. your business was my business, and all that. And we've lost all that because of what politics does. You find in a village, people have been turned against each other because of politics. People are not talking because of politics. There's a lot of just hatred and bitterness, and even within family members, people divided, and it has killed our social fabric and our togetherness. And now what that does is we've seen that also creeping into the church, where Christians really get really resentful to one another. We've seen people inviting all these politicians into their churches, and they say all these things, and you find one group or denomination is very clearly aligned to one person, and so what happens to others that don't really subscribe to that? And so this has been really, really destructive and killed the community that Christ died for and would like to see. He says, man, I desire the church to be on the offensive. And where do we see that? Matthew 28, where he says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. So Jesus has all the authority. Through the cross and his resurrection, he was inaugurated to being King Jesus, the Lord of the universe. And he says, therefore, because of that, go and disciple all the people groups, all the tribes, all the ethnicities. Go and tell them that they are no longer under the bondage of these other gods, of these systems, of their ancestors or whatever. They must come to me, to the family, to the body of Christ, to his church. And now when you look at that, then you know that we are talking of a new nationality, which is the nation of Jesus, King Jesus being the one that we get our identity from. There is no room for other individual nationalities. That's what Matthew 28 is about. It's a declaration of war, to say, get back my people, go out on a search and rescue mission. That's what the church should be doing, a search and rescue mission, bringing good news and telling the big announcement that Jesus is King, and he alone is the one that holds things together. He's the one that gives us identity and restores our image bearing, so that we can experience that new creation existence. So I hope that this is helpful, my brothers and sisters, to say so you got to figure out, what does this look like for me? What decisions do I need to make with regards to my conviction about God's church, Jesus's church? Do I see that as the vehicle that he uses to be able to influence the culture in our communities, in our world, rather than the other way around? I thank you. And at this time, we will take a short break while we wait for my brother Douglas Jacoby, who will be talking about the danger of nationalism, Christian nationalism. Look forward to hearing about that. Thank you very much.